I see it is 12 o'clock. So I just want to thank you for joining. We were hosting our MMI Brown Bag Lunch to get people up to date on kind of issues of the moment as it relates to automation of the markets. And today I'm just so delighted to have Charlton McIlwain from NYU. He testified with me before Congress in December at a hearing called Robots on Wall Street. So thank you so much for joining us today, Charlton.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, so I saw you, it feels like a lifetime ago, before the whole coronavirus pandemic, before so many of our lives were, uprooted. But I think it's just so great we can talk today because we've had a couple months have passed, and just wanted to talk about your sense of automation of the markets right now, what we can expect in like the near and far distant future. There are projections that computer professions are going to increase by 12% over a decade. And that includes AI and a number of computing professions. What do you think are some of the most effective ways to encourage more diverse participation, in the future of workforce as we look at these areas that are anticipated to grow? And how do we build really a pipeline for some of those underrepresented communities, including African Americans?
Yeah, it's a great question to start off with because, as you said, we know that particularly when you look at the financial services sector, as well as the tech sector, and certainly in that overlap, almost every underrepresented group, African Americans, Latinx, Asians, are underrepresented in those sectors. And so as the sector begins to grow, we face ourselves with either very deliberately trying to build the pipeline and increase representation from amongst those groups, or we sort of ensure that underrepresentation will continue. And I think there are some very key things that we can do to help increase those numbers over time. And I think it starts with being in communities of color and finding folks that have the potential to build or to be in these sectors. And I think that's one of those things we have to start early with. Before college, maybe college is a point, but I say that because we have to, I think, first start by giving folks an aspiration that says, here is a world in finance, in technology that is open to you as a career path, and build their aspirations, show them what that could be like, show them that this could be something that they are interested in doing, something that they're good at doing. So we've got to build those aspirations. Then we have to deliberately prepare people for workforce in these areas. And I think that has to be very specific and deliberate. I think one of the things that we've done over the years, and one of the reasons that we continuously find ourselves in this sort of conundrum of having folks that are significantly underrepresented in these career areas, is that we treat them sort of like, financial markets and say, this is a free market thing. We're going to throw out some education to you. The jobs are here. We'll wait for you to come. And, it's all well and good when we think about that in terms of markets, but what we know decade after decade is that that will work for some folks and not for others. So I think as we think about preparing for the future, we have to be deliberate. Be in Latinx communities and Black communities and finding those kids and students with potential, deliberately prepare them for the future to be in this workforce. And that's giving them skills that they can build, but also giving them wide-ranging access to education and the arts and the sciences, so that we're not just preparing kids who are ready to just go in and be in a workforce and have a job, but to be there and thrive, to pivot as these career areas change, which we know they will.
And you've noted a couple things that I think are really important. One was this kind of sense of exposure, of giving people a sense of something to aim for, the desire to aspire to a certain path. And I think a lot of young people's knowledge just comes maybe from pop culture. You see like Wall Street in the movies as an abstraction, or you see so many representations. And I think one of the interesting things is, a lot of the public doesn't realize that the modern day trading isn't necessarily the guys you see on Wall Street, right? It's maybe guys who haven't studied business. It's guys who've studied coding or, algorithms. That is really kind of the newer part of Wall Street. So just exposing young people to know, maybe you should be taking a coding class instead of a business class if you want to get on Wall Street. That's already, thing one. And just knowing people, getting to know people in the industries. And then you raised such a good point about, education and also, barriers to education. In your book, Black Software, you really detail some of the hurdles that either intentionally or unintentionally have been present that, when you look through who makes it into some of the really elite universities, they're just, was really low single digit participation from African Americans, dating back a couple decades. Do you get the sense that the numbers are improving from an education perspective? Is there more diversity coming into the universities? And then how do you improve that number?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And, I think truthfully, when I look at the numbers across many institutions, the real reality is that we stay essentially the same. In looking at the past decade or so, there was a sort of a jump in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it seems there was a significant increase of undergraduate students coming into universities. But then that ends up plateauing, and that plateau remains the same for many years. And there are moments where that diversity increases, but it often sort of goes up momentarily, then comes back to its plateau and so forth. And so I think we still have a ways to go. And I think it's important that higher education institutions do more and do better to recruit diverse students, because that's our talent pool. When we're thinking about the students that will be into these career fields, that's who we have to work with. And if those folks are absent in that first 4 years of college, we know they'll probably be absent all the way up that career line. So it's very important that higher education does its job in this area.
So I guess part of it is maybe recruitment, but part is also steering people who've gone to the colleges to stay in those majors or change into some of these majors of, at least for the industry we're in, of automated trading, of taking the coding classes, taking the different like C++ classes and all the different coding languages that they need. Do you get a sense that there is a lot of enthusiasm for these fields and that universities are encouraging more students to either go in those tech tracks once they're in, because they're very competitive. It's not like I ended up being an English major. That's kind of the opt out, but started in some of those fields. How do you keep kids in those high tech, really tough majors?
Well, I think, again, going back to sort of thinking about even pre-college and the sort of aspirational sets, I think that's where we start that work, because, I'm thinking about particularly my own NYU, where students come in applying to a major already, right? And so that already sort of shrinks your pathway unless you jump off and change course in some way. And so if we start with sort of pre-college and saying, here are some career fields, as you mentioned, and not just, banking or finance or trading, but every aspect of those career fields, so that they know here's a possibility. They get to college, they know here's what it takes to get from A to Z. And then that's where the work comes in, of making sure we don't lose folks, because that's where, a kid in that first math class or coding class doesn't do so well. Often that's the ticket out, either because of the way that the system works, or the student fails and feels like, okay, this isn't for me. I failed, so it must be something about me that I can't do this. And so I think it's incumbent upon us in educational institutions to build structures that say, look, you can do what you aspire to do. Keep very close tabs on students. If they fail, figure out ways to get from that failure to other paths of success for them. And then show them where that support is all along the way. And so I think the mistake that we make often is students come in and saying, hey, I want to be in finance, I want to be in technology, I know I need to learn these skills, I got to take these statistics courses, etc. I fail, no one's really paying attention, and I'm gone. And no one's ever sort of there to say, hey, you can do this, let me show you how, where, to do it.
So you're talking about minimizing people kind of falling through the cracks. And then also, I think you raise an interesting point about getting kids interested and fired up about the topic, not when they're in college, but much earlier. Are you talking high school or even earlier, like middle school or sooner? What is the best age group to really get young people engaged in technology?
I mean, I think it can't be too early, but I tend to think, middle school is a right point. You get that aspirations, you're starting that transition into high school where your academics are going to start to play a much larger role in sort of setting your pathway. And as you say, particularly we're thinking about industries that are big industries where kids can make lots of money and have careers that are long lasting. It's competitive, as you mentioned earlier. And that means you've got to really be prepared early. You can't start once you get in college. I mean, that's almost too late in some ways. And there'll
Right.
be some folks that will, pick up the pieces and pivot and be able to do that. But really, if we can raise kids' aspirations in middle school and throughout high school, give them the tools that they're going to be sort of using as a foundation once they get to college, then they're prepared once they're into college to find those pathways, take the courses, succeed where they can't succeed, be prepared socially, emotionally to know where to go to get help, where to find assistance, mentorship, etc. So I think we can't begin too early, but middle school certainly, high school, and in many ways, once they get to college, it's almost too late. We do as much as we can, but we really, 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 I think this means that we start early, and that's where we have to make our commitments.
And Charlton, you've written really, a whole book on this topic, right? Black software. I've just been reading through it, and it's been really eye-opening. You're really shining a light on history of the Afronet and the Black internet that many of us may not be aware of. And you write about the vanguard of African-American coders, detailing, some success stories of individuals who went through, some programs like at Clemson in the 80s, got really interested in coding before college, like you said. And can you just share some of this period of history and what some of your key takeaways are for your audience and your readers?
Yeah, and I'll try not to get too immersed in this because it was really a book that was an eye opener for me, and I was excited writing about it because I thought so much and stories about folks that I'd certainly never heard about, and I think many. So maybe I'll start with one of the latter ones. So this was something that blew me away when I learned about it and then wrote about it. Remember in 1992, 93, 94, as the web comes online, and we've got this new thing called the internet. And for so long, the internet for most people was simply, cables and hardware and software that no one knew anything about, had no interest in, and so forth. The internet of 1994 was that, right?
Yeah.
You had places like AOL, but there were not folks clamoring to be online. They were there. What is this? What does this have to do with me? What do I have to gain from being online? And so the internet of 1994 needed users. And so to think that the first company to really, in a very big way, bring legions of new users to this thing we call the internet was a company called Net Noir, built by two African American, one a lawyer, one a computer geek. They were financed by venture capitalists and really by AOL. And so America Online at that time, when they said, if we're going to profit in a big way in this space, we need content. We need content that people will consume, gravitate towards. And they found that in this site, Net Noir, that featured Black cultural content. And so I used to have a chapter in the book and took it away. It was called Remember When the Internet Was Black.
Wow.
And it was really all about the ways in which Black culture pervaded the early internet and is the internet on which what we now know as the web was built. And so to think that Black ingenuity, and once you give people the opportunity and the tools to thrive in a big way, that it can be done, and it can be done in a very big way. And I'll take that and pivot to an earlier story. And one of the folks that I write a lot about, which was a guy named Derek Brown, who also built a significant site in the 94, 95, 96 that was called the Universal Black Pages. And Derek was one of my favorite folks to talk to and write about, because you could see the arc of his life from when he was 8, 9 years old. And the moment when his mother first said, hey, there's this new thing called a computer, you could get one, and he got one, and he started playing around with it, and he fell in love with data, and he fell in love with spreadsheets. But at a certain point, he hit a wall, right? He opened up the manuals, he tried to read, he tried to do stuff, but then he ran into limits. And that's where someone from Clemson University, a professor, had found him as a 9th grader, as a 10th grader, and said, hey, we want to find kids like you, African Americans with high potential and interests and aspirations in the engineering and coding career areas. And so they built a program, and Derek was with the Clemson professors as a 10th grader and an 11th grader as a 12th grader. Then, of course, he ends up at Clemson as an engineering student when he decides to go to college, and then builds a successful career from there. But that is kind of the model that I'm talking about, as we, not leave it to chance about who will show up in our college classrooms, who will show up in our industries as workers, as professionals, but to go find the folks that we want, and to invest in preparing them for success in those sectors, not just as workers who have a skill and will always work and build that skill, but folks that you can prepare enough that they can do the work that's there one day and then make choices for themselves about where that path should lead. But I think Black Software for me was really a story about how we can do the thing that we have tried to do for so long, which is build a workforce that is truly representative of our country in many ways.
I thought it was really inspiring, and I thought the Clemson program in particular was a really interesting, very concrete example of kind of everything you've been detailing, this idea of catching kids early who have a real talent, aptitude, and enthusiasm, building all of those, and giving kind of the exposure, the mentorship, and some resources as well to lift these individual students up. And it seems to me like, you've created a program at NYU. Is that kind of inspired in part by the Clemson model? Or can you talk a bit about what you've created at NYU? I think in 2017, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's called NYU College and Career Lab. And it was interesting the way it began, because it really did begin as an inspiration from this Clemson program. I was researching it at the time. I had been talking to Derek. It was the first time I'd really heard of a program like this. And at the time, one of my good friends at the university, who's now dean of the business school, we were sitting around and basically having a similar conversation as you and I are having today. His point was, I'm a business professor. I teach economics. I get kids in my first freshman seminar. And there are a handful of kids of color in that first year. And almost inevitably, when I see that same cohort senior year, all of those students of color are gone. Mm-hmm. Where did they go? Why did they disappear? Some of them end up in other programs that are not bad programs. They go to English. You got an English degree, not a bad degree, but it's not where those kids were aspiring to be. But they somehow got counseled out and there. And so we began to brainstorm about how do we, as a higher education institution, really intervene and intervene in a big way. And we started to look, around campus, and we had programs that, were really about sort of building, coding skills or math skills, this, that, and the other. But what we started to see that was a real sort of open area was a very simple, how do we find kids, bring them in, and get them to aspire to what they could do and be. And we set that as really a foundational and key goal, that we bring in students from across the New York City public schools areas that are in schools and in districts that are most underserved. And then we invite them to campus. We connect them with the campus community. So over 5 weeks, they are meeting with, they're taking classes from professors. They are meeting with alumni from varying programs that are out in the world and in careers and professions that they might aspire to be. And I remember this last year's, moment going to Facebook. And so there was a team of high-level Facebook folks, all of them African-American and Latinx. And they talked about how they got to where they were. And they talked about being kids and having some facility with computers, or having an aspiration of wanting to, mimic someone they saw on TV or in the movies, as you mentioned earlier. And then somehow they found their way to a college campus. In this case, it was NYU, and these were all NYU alum who came through our business program and others. And to see the look on these kids' faces, right? And it's a lot that's happening in just that simple moment. It's saying, here's someone who looks like me, came from where I came from, and is in a place that I think I would love to be in. And they have made it. And now they're telling me how to do it, what the obstacles were. And that was a big part of it as well. Folks saying, look, it's hard. I had to prepare this way. Here is a roadblock. I had to figure out a way around it. But you end up then with students that start to think, hey, I can do this. And I can do a lot more things than I thought I could a month ago. And so this program then starts with that very basic, simply introducing kids to career paths, nurturing their aspirations. And then as we expand and grow, the idea is that those kids will continue with us year after year as they progress through high school. We have the unique ability to track those students' academic performance and understand whether our work with them has a direct causal relationship to their academic achievement through high school, and then ultimately through college. And so all of this was really simply played out what I was learning about Derek and that Clemson program at the early 80s, 90s. And so trying to do that and do it at scale, and then really to sustain it, right? And so one of the things that was a takeaway as I was talking to Derek was, he made it through, and he had several cohorts of folks like him who did, but he said, at a certain point, the university says this isn't really a priority that we could sustain, and so we don't commit funds to it, and then it goes away. Clemson at one point in time was recruiting and educating the largest and most diverse group of engineers at the time in the 80s and early 90s. But then programs like these sort of fell off, and then you lose your pipeline, and folks end up in college for many other reasons and circumstances, but not always the ones that we hope and want to be there. And so I think that's where we have to make our commitment, not only to building these programs, but really sustaining them financially and with human resources over a long period of time.
And just to reiterate what you've said, when you see a program like Clemson's impressive program decline, right? I just want to highlight some troubling facts you noted in your congressional testimony that I'm just pulling them out, that you noted that between 2007 and 2015, that African American participation in the financial services sector, that includes senior level jobs as well as entry, declined. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that it declined between 2007 and 2015, and that African Americans still make up just 4.4% of the securities subsector. And so I think, there's more than ever a need for programs like what you're building, because I think it sounds like the benefit it's not instant gratification, right? It takes 10 or 15 years to get these kids, when you start in high school or junior high school, out into the pipeline. So I guess we have about 5 minutes left. I'd love just to get, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement happening, we're seeing such mainstream attention and I think enthusiasm from the public to try to help on all these issues, like diversifying the future of workforce, as well as criminal justice reform. There's just so much going on. But if our audience members were thinking, how could they as private sector participants help? Is it, could you give some concrete ideas? Is it like actually being like, hey, we're going to reach out to this program and bring some of our team in to do exposure therapy? Is it, it's not as simple probably as just writing a check. What are some action items that, individuals can take to try to, to help out, if they're watching this and think this is something important as well?
Indeed. Writing a check is not bad. and I say that really to say everything requires the financial support to sustain itself, right? And what we're really looking for, and I'm drawing my inspiration in this moment from the folks who, at police departments and so forth are running with the defunding police or rethinking what policing means. These are deep structural changes that I think probably none of us a month ago would have ever thought about realistically happening, right? And so if we think about doing and thinking about the same level of deep structural change in the workforce sector and arena, what that looks like, it means recommitting to building deliberately something different. And I think that means both imagining what that could be like, but also finding programs like NYU's College and Career Lab that are already working in this space to do what we need to do, and saying, I want to invest here, and that investment I know and I'm willing to commit, even though the results of it I won't see for another decade or longer. And I think that's what structural change really means. And it really starts with the commitment to say, we have to and we can do this. And then identifying what it takes to do it. And that goes to some of the things I mentioned earlier. And I think that's one of the key things for this particular area. This is not a mystery. This is not a problem we have not confronted. In fact, we've confronted it decade after decade after decade. We build workforces by providing deliberate opportunity to the folks that we want to see in our companies, in our workforces. And so that's the same thing. And we have to just commit ourselves to saying, here are programs, here are people that are doing the work as it should be done. Let's invest. And that's everything from money, it's investing things that build social capital. I mean, think what it would be like for some of your member companies, institutions, to have high schoolers that are working alongside some of your senior folks in these areas, whether it's in trading or whether it's in developing software that supports financial industries in some way. Sitting along a team of coders building a new product and giving folks that sense of what that is in ninth grade or 10th grade or 11th, and building a long-standing relationship or partnership with higher education institutions, with students, so that there is a revolving door as such, so that students come in, they're getting knowledge from college, but they're getting early exposure to what real industry and real workplaces look like, what it does, what it takes to succeed, and being able to do all of that before they're in the workforce, really. and when it matters sort of much more. And what we do there then is prepare larger groups of underrepresented folks for success. You don't start an entryway that starts, when you graduate from college and you walk into the doors of a new company and then figuring it all out from there. If we build in those students' capital, social capital, academic capital, et cetera, early on, so that when they hit the workforce, they're ready to thrive, they can succeed at the work they're doing and see a career ladder that helps them succeed over a long period of time.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I would encourage everyone to read Charlton's book, Black Software. We'll be noting it on MMI's social media feed at Modern Markets, as well as a link to his NYU program. And the net takeaway I get is, this isn't an easy fix. It's a long investment. It's really putting in the capital and the time to see this in return on the investment that you're making with these students, that it's a 10 or 15-year time horizon from start to finish, and it's an ongoing effort. But thank you so much for sharing your takeaways and all of your thought leadership on this really important topic. And again, we'll be posting this online, so thanks for following us at Modern Markets on Twitter. And Charlton, we will be looking forward to, I think, participating in your program next month.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to having you, and thanks for everyone that's tuned in. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right.